On this Thursday night, making more promises about climate change. Canada and California's new pact.
The bottom line is we're delivering what matters to people.
Why critics fear it's all talk and not enough action. Historic primetime public hearings into the U.S. Capitol attack. What those caught up in it are expecting.
I'm watching for the truth.
And the promise to prove who was at the center of it. Russia's war in Ukraine fueling famine.
Russia is clearly weaponizing food.
The impending global food crisis.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is no more pressing issue affecting every living thing on Earth than the changing climate, and our political leaders have made lots of promises on how to address it. Today there were more. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Los Angeles. He met there privately with the U.S. President Joe Biden and with California Governor Gavin Newsom, the two signing what they call a memorandum of cooperation to work together on things like clean tech, conserving biodiversity, dealing with wildfires, and zero-emission transportation. California is running out of time. It's entering the third consecutive summer of severe drought in what is the driest year on record. Though it's only early June, there's already a severe water shortage. In Southern California, water restrictions have been imposed on millions of people. In some cities, lawns can be watered once a week for 8 minutes only. Rule breakers face hefty fines, and farmers in some regions have been ordered to stop drawing water from rivers and streams. The window to avoid the worst impacts of climate change is narrowing fast. So what difference will this agreement with California make? Our chief political correspondent David Akin is traveling with the Prime Minister and has our top story tonight.
Justin Trudeau and Gavin Newsom, two progressive politicians who like each other, who each lead jurisdictions of about 40 million people, and who are convinced governments must do more to fight climate change.
On climate action, the world is watching.
I'm here for a reason, proud to be standing side by side with the Prime Minister of Canada on this issue.
And they're now building on earlier Canada-California agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by signing a new Climate Action and Nature Protection Partnership. They say it will benefit people in both jurisdictions.
We're delivering what matters to people. Clean air and water, good jobs, and a strong future.
One new area of cooperation, fighting increasingly frequent and severe wildfires that have caused immense damage in California, but also in provinces like BC and Alberta. Now, the two jurisdictions will formalize plans to share best practices and exchange research and information to prevent fires and minimize future damage. Critics, though, say this new agreement is yet another example from the Trudeau government that amounts to more talk than actual action.
I think we do need to start seeing actual action on the ground for some of these things rather than sort of agreements.
Canada's Environment Commissioner, for example, has consistently given the Trudeau Liberals failing grades on its climate plans, in part because Canada is one of the world's biggest oil and gas producers. The Prime Minister says that cannot be an excuse for not pushing ahead.
Yeah, Canada is a big oil and gas producing country. And because of that, not in spite of that, we are leading on climate change as well.
Both these leaders, remember, a Liberal and a Democrat, were asked how these environment agreements might survive if their governments are replaced by, say, a Conservative or Republican government that may have different views on climate change. And their answer, these agreements give certainty to private sector corporations to make investments in new factories and new hires in clean technology, and that private sector momentum is very hard for future governments to reverse. Donna?
David Akin in Los Angeles tonight, thanks. At the same time as the Prime Minister was making more climate pledges in California, his government continues to push ahead with a deepwater oil field off Newfoundland and Labrador. In April, the Bay du Nord project, 500 kilometers east of St. John's, was approved. Now there are growing questions about whether the federal and provincial Liberal governments are moving in opposite directions on the environment. Ross Lord explains.
Higher oil prices mean Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore oil and gas industry is on the upswing again. And St. John's Harbour could be seeing even more of these supply ships and their towering presence.
You will see this harbour much busier when Bay du Nord comes on. You'll see the skies busier with the helicopters, the restaurants, the stores downtown.
The Bay du Nord project is in the Flemish Pass, about 500 kilometres east of St. John's. It's immense. The developer, Equinor, says it will cost $16 billion Canadian to develop. Over several decades, the oil field would produce an estimated 500 million barrels and create the equivalent of 16,000 jobs. It's an unusual time for an oil mega project, with Canada supposedly going green to counter the devastating effects of climate change. And yet, the federal government has approved Bay du Nord, a decision that makes no sense to environmentalists.
Canada is absolutely trying to do two things at one time.
This Memorial University instructor says it's time for a clean break from fossil fuel industries.
This trying to walk the environment industry divide is highly problematic, and it's burning the planet. It makes Canada a bad actor on climate change in the international stage.
A coalition of environmental groups is suing the federal government, saying Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault dropped the ball.
It's our position that downstream greenhouse gas emissions are one such effect he has to consider when he makes that decision. And in this case, he didn't do that. He didn't look at those effects.
The government says Bay du Nord will be subject to the strongest greenhouse gas conditions ever in Canada, and emissions will be far below average. And the Prime Minister insists there's no contradiction.
What we're seeing with Europe, what we're seeing around the world is a need to transform our energy mix to remove the carbon emissions from it, and that's the direction we're going in, not backwards.
Bay du Nord is not a done deal. Equinor has other options to consider in other parts of the world. And now the provincial government wants to discuss with the company how much money would flow into this province.
If the scope has increased, we feel that our take should increase. Our people should benefit from it. It's our resource.
Equinor told Global News it anticipates making a final decision within the next couple of years, with production planned by the end of the decade. Ross Lord, Global News, St. John's.
Canada Post is unveiling its plan to reach net zero emissions, though the company's CEO says it won't get there until 2050.
We know we need to move faster on this at Canada Post. We understand the complete urgency of reducing emissions in Canada, and for that matter, across the globe.
Doug Ettinger says Canada Post's challenge in going green is how much ground they cover. The first priority, he says, is transforming its fleet, making its 14,000 vehicles 50% electric by 2030 and fully electric by 2040. Some low-emission vehicles are already being tested in the Ottawa area. The Department of National Defence is looking for potential impacts after a cyber attack on a military contractor believed to have been carried out by a ransomware group with ties to Russia. DND says the contractor, CMC Electronics, disclosed a cyber breach late last month. The Montreal-based business does millions of dollars of work for the Canadian Armed Forces. Last week, it was announced as part of a team upgrading Canada's CH-146 Griffin helicopters. In a statement, CMC's parent company confirms a third-party intrusion into its network that it says disrupted operations in connection with a ransom demand. There is no indication the hackers stole sensitive information. DND says none of its internal systems employ CMC technology. You can read more about this and the group believed to be behind it on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. Now to Washington. History is unfolding in prime time tonight as the committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol begins public hearings. The committee says it will tell the story of a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 presidential election and block the peaceful transfer of power. It promises detailed new evidence that it will be released that will connect the dots between former President Donald Trump and the attempted insurrection. Jackson Proskow on the hype around these hearings and what's expected.
The most detailed account of the attempt to overthrow an American election comes from inside the very building that came under attack, with days of hearings revealing volumes of new evidence, including testimony from those closest to former President Donald Trump, like his daughter Ivanka.
It was a multi-level, multi-step process of trying to negate, nullify, and destroy Joe Biden's majority in the Electoral College.
The committee investigating January 6th carried out hundreds of interviews and amassed thousands of documents, focusing on the rioters, the planning, and the role of Trump and his election lies.
You don't concede when there's theft involved.
The agonizing screams of Officer Daniel Hodges are part of that dark body of evidence. He was brutally crushed while trying to defend the Capitol from the mob.
I'm watching for the truth. I want to know. I want to know what happened. I want to know who, what, where, when, why.
No matter how damning the evidence, the committee will have to overcome Republican efforts to rewrite history. Those who insist there's nothing to investigate.
In fact, it is the most political and least legitimate committee in American history.
Americans remain split over the attack on their democracy. When it comes to finding out what happened, polls show 89% of Democrats say it's important. Only 52% of Republicans feel the same.
Watching all the politicians say that it wasn't a big deal, that no one needs to pay attention to it, that it's a political witch hunt, especially when it's so obvious that that's not the case. I don't know how they can do that.
For all the anticipated revelations, less explosive details may be the most critical in preventing a repeat of that horrible day, like the role of fake pro-Trump electors or efforts to interfere in state voting certifications.
If you want to say, what are we trying to do to protect the system from a recurrence, some of those things that seem abstract and maybe a little bit technical and boring may actually be the most important part of the hearings.
The divide is not only over how Americans perceive the events of January 6th, it also extends to where they can watch the historic hearings unfold. Every single U.S. TV network is carrying tonight's hearings with one notable exception, Fox News, the top-rated choice of Trump's Republican voter base. Donna?
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. The U.S. House of Representatives is once again taking up gun legislation a day after it voted to pass some sweeping gun control legislation.
No child, no parent deserves to live in fear of gun violence.
The Democrat-led House passed a bill today to nationalize red flag laws, which seek to keep guns away from individuals deemed a threat to themselves and others. Last night, it passed legislation that raises the minimum age for purchasing a semi-automatic weapon from 18 to 21 and bans civilian use of high-capacity magazines, though the proposals have almost no chance of being approved by the Senate and actually becoming law. An apology from a senior military leader coming up, how one of his social media posts is causing controversy. Eight days after the federal government unveiled former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour's scathing report on sexual misconduct in the Canadian Forces, a social media post by a senior military leader is raising questions about the real commitment to culture change. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson has the story. Mercedes?
Donna, the comment was made by Major General Simon Bernard. He's the head of the military's HR department and someone who, in that role, obviously has a key and important role to play in culture change for the forces. Many survivors of sexual misconduct were upset to see him among the dozens of people taking part last weekend in a grassroots social media campaign in support of Canada's military colleges. Bernard changed his LinkedIn profile picture to his Royal Military College graduation photo and commented TDV on a post written by another graduate. That stands for Truth, Duty, Valor, RMC's motto. Survivors felt that didn't show any mindfulness on Bernard's part. Further proof they think that change at the college will be hard to come by. In her report, Justice Louise Arbour said Canada's military colleges were institutions, quote, from a different era, plagued by what she called a discriminatory culture. None of it sits well with Mark Popoff. He's a former senior military officer who also used to lead officer cadet training at RMC Kingston.
The reactionary viewpoint that I'm seeing on social media is disappointing from a lot of people that I know personally, because Justice Arbour is not attacking them, is not attacking the institution of RMC, but it is pointing out some flaws that exist and identifying the need for some changes.
Bernard later deleted his comment and removed his graduation photo after being challenged by several women who said they were assaulted and harmed at the military colleges. In a statement to Global News, Bernard said, quote, "Though there was no ill intent in my post, I accept accountability for what in hindsight I did not consider the impact on others, and I sincerely apologize to anyone who has been affected." It's not the first time, though, that Bernard's judgment has been questioned. He was removed last year from his role in Canada's vaccine rollout task force after being accused of using a racial slur, the N-word, while at work sometime in the year 2020. DND said that 2 investigations did not produce enough evidence to go further. Despite that, Bernard was still later promoted to the rank of Major General. Donna?
Okay, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa, thanks. War and hunger ahead, the link between Russia's aggression and a global food crisis.
You're watching Global National.
A naval blockade on Ukraine's southern port is having a serious impact on grain exports. Before Russia's invasion, millions of tons of grain and produce was shipped from Ukraine each month. As Dan Spector reports, Russia is now being accused of weaponizing food.
One of them this year.
The Time 100 Gala is back to gleaming with glitz and glamour, but as it celebrated its annual list of the world's most influential people, it was a guest of honor who couldn't attend that provided the biggest impact.
Millions of people may starve if Russia's blockade of the Black Sea continues.
In accepting his honor, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also spoke directly about the crisis still gripping his people and underscored the potential for a catastrophic global food crisis if Ukrainian grain exports don't soon restart.
Russia is clearly weaponizing food.
The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the world's 3rd and 4th largest grain exporters, has fueled food price inflation and put global grain supplies at risk. Developing countries are the hardest hit. Civil unrest is already intensifying in countries like Sri Lanka, where police clashed with protesters again Thursday. The United Nations compares the looming famine to a gathering storm.
Ukraine's food production and the food and fertilizer produced by Russia must be brought back into world markets despite the war.
The UN is working with Turkey, trying to broker a deal to lift Russia's blockade of Ukraine's ports. We see it as a reasonable and implementable plan, said Turkey's foreign minister after meeting with his Russian counterpart. Though talks have been described as fruitful, so far there has been no breakthrough after weeks of bargaining. The Russian side, as usual, is playing its stupid games, said Ukraine's ambassador to Turkey. Ukrainian officials claim the Kremlin is imposing unreasonable conditions, while Russia says free shipment depends on an end to Western sanctions. Here at home, access to food is not in danger, but prices will continue to rise. Sylvain Charlebois points to a potential peak this fall. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Spillers Cove, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you Saturday for the new reality. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.